All right, welcome everybody to today's virtual event. Are you ready for Drupal 9? We're really excited to bring this to you. It's pretty fresh content. We're about a week away from DrupalCon, so I think it's top of mind for everybody. We're going to set the agenda for today. We're going to do some quick introductions, who Phase 2 is and who these fine gentlemen are in front of you. We have some questions that we've already received from the community in terms of just what's burning in terms of Drupal 9. And then of course, we're gonna have our Drupal 9 Ask Me Anything. So feel free to send those questions to us as soon as they pop into your head via the Zoom Q&A functionality. And then finally, we'll leave you with some thoughts on just what comes next and what you should be thinking about. If you don't know Phase 2 today, a little bit about us. So our mission is to create digital experience that advances the human experience. And we do this for a number of organizations in a number of different industries. And very often we use Drupal to do that. So I think we're excited just to tell you a little bit more about that and showcase the expertise we've built over the years we've been doing it. So our panel today is none other than Jonathan, Bloom, and Toby. I'm gonna let these three gentlemen introduce themselves, and just in case we get the question, Toby and Jonathan are not identical twins, even though they might look like they are. Bloom, why don't you get us started?
Hey, I'm Bloom, Director of Engineering with a focus on front end here at Phase 2, which means I mainly deal in everything that touches a browser, JavaScript frameworks, CSS frameworks, that kind of a thing. And was the question favorite movie? Is that right?
Yes. Oh yes, please.
All right. So favorite movie? Aliens. It is the most perfect action film that's ever been filmed.
Toby, what do you got for us?
Hey everyone, so I'm Toby Hagler. I'm also a Director of Engineering here at Phase 2. I lead our application development practice. I also happen to be a certified Drupal Grandmaster, which means I have all of the certs. My favorite movie is Ghostbusters. It's a classic. It holds up today. It's just funny on a bunch of different levels. So.
Great, and I guess it's my turn. My name is Jonathan Adams. I'm a software architect here at Phase 2 Technology. I deal with all things backend and all things Drupal. I love APIs. I love making things work. I love bringing things together, and I love making things efficient. Let's see, my favorite movie it's The Fifth Element. It is just the perfect sci-fi movie that has something for everyone.
All right, thanks everybody. So just to set the stage a little bit, what's the story with Drupal 9? So Drupal 9 released on June 3rd. We've been getting questions from our clients and just people in the community about what they can expect. So a lot of interest and a lot of unknowns in terms of what should they do, whether they're on Drupal 6, 7, 8, a lot of those questions. And this quote actually came from Dries, who's the founder and project lead on Drupal. The big deal about Drupal 9 is that it should not be a big deal. So I think we kind of wanted to start here today with just this idea that what's been communicated to everyone is that this is not going to be the same process as it was from Drupal 6 to 7 and then 7 to 8. So I wanted to give our panel just a minute to chime in on this and see did this hold up in your minds? Bloom, take us away.
Yeah, one of the big things about this is what you're doing on Drupal 8 right now. If you're following best practices on development and custom modules for Drupal 8, you're pretty much ready for 9. This should be boring. It should just be like, flipping a switch and upgrading some packages. So that's a really big takeaway. On the front end space, nothing drastic is happening. I can get into details a little bit later, but yeah, it shouldn't be a big deal.
Toby, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important part, right? It's almost like the perfect project deployment is the one that's anticlimactic. It's the one that goes off without a hitch. You don't notice it. The other big thing about Drupal 9, of course, is with Drupal 8, 9, and even 10 in just a year and a half or less than 2, the important thing is that it's a continuation of Drupal and platform development. It's not something that you're going to build, have, and maintain for a few years, and then have to throw away and migrate again. So that's the sort of the beauty of it not being a big deal.
Really hammering home on that migrate concept. A lot of us got some PTSD going from 7 to 8. We've all been involved in a capital M migration, right? The goal here is there won't be migrations of content. That's where a lot of time going from 7 to 8 was really spent. And ideally, that won't be the case here.
And if I could chime in for a second too, I like to think of it as like a train station analogy, right? So from going from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7, it was like you're on a train, but all of a sudden the train tracks ended and you had to get off, right? You had to get off and you had to get off the train and go to another train track. Same thing with Drupal 7. When it comes to like going from Drupal 8 to Drupal 9, it's all that you're doing is you're going into this train station. You're on Drupal 8, you're going into this train station. When things are ready and you're ready to go, you don't have to get off the train. You don't have to get off the tracks. You just keep on going. So it's a lot easier to migrate, or not to migrate, but to get yourself on Drupal 9.
I love that. All right. So our first question that we've got in advance from people, and this is a big one, and recently it was just announced that Drupal 7's end of life won't be until November 2022. So a lot of people have come to us and said, is there still a need to make a change until then, or should I wait until then? What should I do? How does this change things for people on Drupal 7?
So one of the things you need to keep in mind is the reason it was actually pushed back another year for end of life was, because of things going on in the world. It's a way to sort of allow people to have the chance to catch up and breathe and readjust. But the thing that is going to be important to note is that once November 2022 comes around, the end of life for Drupal 7 means that it's no longer supported. So security, is no longer going to be maintained for Drupal 7. There will be commercial support available, but that's not going to be taking advantage of the community. And sure, 2022 sounds like a long way away, but even as of now, Drupal 7 support in the community contrib space is in decline. It's not that it's not still active. It is still pretty active in a lot of areas, but there's just not going to be a lot of support for things, especially for modules that are part of Drupal 8 and 9 and core. So for instance, you're not going to get a lot of support with views anymore in Drupal 7. A lot of the layout modules like panels and things like that just aren't going to be as actively maintained. And so over time, the community support for 7 is going to dwindle long before the actual official support.
It's good to point out that if you're still on 7 and you're looking to start the migration, go right to 9, right? You have the opportunity, do it. It's going to be, the same level of effort, and might as well benefit from all of the opportunities you have in Drupal 9.
Panel, if someone happens to still be on Drupal 6, there are probably some people out there, what should they do?
The sorter doesn't really change. It's, if you're on Drupal 6, you're already in that space where you're having to rely on commercial support for security and maintenance. Right. So if you're on Drupal 6, if you're on Drupal 7, the level of effort to go to Drupal 8 or 9, as the case may be, is going to be the same. The effort is going to be the same. The thing to keep in mind though is if you're on 6, there's a lot of things that haven't been able to change for a really long time. So look at this as sort of the Marie Kondo. Let's find everything that doesn't bring us joy with our current platform and think in bigger terms and go to something new. There's a lot that has changed, even just in Drupal 8 between when 8 was released and now, not to mention all of the advances that 8 has over 6 and 7. So it's an opportunity to really sort of revitalize your platform and figuring out exactly what you want to do with your in the digital space.
The good news here is the migrate module and the migrate API is very, very mature. And the Drupal 6 plugins for the migrate API are great, right? So if you're on 6 and you're looking to, do this kind of pretty big jump, the support is there to get content out of 6 into 9, right? Massive jump. But yeah, that module, we've used it on a whole lot of projects. And it is very, very powerful for what it lets you reach into 6 and pull stuff out of.
Thanks, guys. So our next question we've been getting quite a bit here is, how can I make sure my site is prepared to make the jump to Drupal 9? And I know this is a heavy one, so a lot to unpack here.
I could talk about front-end specifics if we're interested in that.
Go for it.
All right. So the big news here is that if you've, like we said earlier, if you've been building in Drupal 8 so far, jumping to 9 isn't going to be super traumatizing. In that, nothing really changes. We're going to go from Twig 1 to Twig 2. And a major jump like that, you might think that a lot of the things in the templating language Twig would change. In fact, nothing has changed. You have all the exact same number of functions and Twig filters that you've always had. I did a comparison between 1 and 2 on the Symfony website. Nothing was removed and nothing was added is the other thing. So it's not like, there's some big new thing you should expect to be using in Twig 2. It's most of the same stuff. A number of things have been deprecated, right? Just to let you know that when Twig 3 is finally introduced, and I think there's actually a plan to get Twig 3 support into later versions of Drupal 9, there will be some removals and some pretty big changes there. So just be prepared for that. We've been using Twig 2 at phase 2 in all of our pre-visualization work. We work in Pattern Lab for some of our prototyping and design system stuff, but we've been in Twig 2 for the last 2 years, and it's been a flawless integration into Drupal 8 so far.
And then too, on the back end side of things too, you want to take a look at the way you built your Drupal site. Are you using these outdated Drupal patterns? Are you using workbench moderation instead of content moderation? Are you using contrib media instead of the core media modules? Are you using paragraphs instead of leveraging the flexibility that you get with things like Layout Builder? So really, you want to kind of do sort of an audit of your site to say, hey, listen, am I following the best Drupal 8 practices right now? And then if I am, then I'm in good shape. If not, then you want to take a look at what is it going to take me to be able to get over to the right Drupal 8 practices, the way that the community is going, and get your site in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of code deprecation, Drupal, we went through this, with 8.5. Drupal changed dependencies on Symfony from 2 to 3. Now with Drupal 9. The dependencies are switching from Symfony 3 to Symfony 4. So that's the driver that's bringing around all these code deprecations. There's actually a lot of tools that actually help with this. There's things like Drupal check with Drush. There is the update module that will help you identify contrib modules that have deprecated code. And there's a pretty active community effort to upgrade Drupal 8 modules to Drupal 9. So those are well underway. But yeah, I think Jonathan really nailed it with, making sure that you're following, updated design patterns as well as your code is in good shape. Those are going to be the things that make sure that you're on the roadmap for later versions of Drupal 9, so that at the end of 2020, when Drupal 9.1 is released, that's when you're going to start getting the new features in core again. And that puts you on the train, so to speak, to getting back to all of those new features coming your way.
Something really interesting to note is that these dependency upgrades are not just jumping ahead to the most bleeding edge version. Symfony 5 is out. Drupal 9, though, is going to take us to Symfony 4.4, all right, which is an easier transition, right? So a lot of this upgrade going to Drupal 9 is about making that transition like smaller jumps, less drastic jumps. Twig 3 is out, for instance. But we're going to go to Twig 2 in Drupal 9, right? So just take that into account that like it's going to be an easier transition. These packages are all supported for, for the lifespan of Drupal 9, but there are goals to get them up to even further versions later on.
Bloom, you might have just answered this question, but one of the things we run into is Drupal 8 end of life is now actually before Drupal 7 end of life because Symfony 3 is becoming end of life. I think I got that right, hopefully. For the end user, does any of this matter? Like, why should I care?
I'm gonna let Toby answer the specifics around like the Symfony side of this, but the answer is like there's still, there's still security support, but the transition, the upgrade process is so painless that it's going to be pretty easy to do. Toby, you have details on this.
Yeah, it is essentially going from 8.8 to 8.9. 8.9 and 9.0 are the same versions of Drupal with the removal of deprecated code and the update of the Symfony dependency. And in fact, all of that deprecated code is just there to support some services and classes and some other things that existed in Symfony 2 way back when Drupal 8 was first released. And so that deprecated code is just there to sort of like provide some backwards compatibility. So by removing that, you're removing a lot of cruft to support old paradigms that just aren't the norm anymore. And so getting rid of those deprecated code elements that actually reduces the maintenance on your platform, on your sites. So that's one aspect of continuing to upgrade the Symfony dependencies. But also in terms of, Chris, your original question about the end of life for 8 coming before 7, the idea being that Drupal 8 is a version bump to Drupal 9. There is no migration. There isn't a rebuild unless you want to sort of take the opportunity to revamp your site, which I think a lot of people want to do typically anyway, just to keep it up to date.
One last question. And Bloom, I think you wanted to say something else, so I'll let you chime in. So you go first.
Just a quick note on some things that are being hard removed on the front end space. jQuery UI is mostly being ripped out. Nobody used it on the front end. So if we ever built things that needed some kind of front end interactions, jQuery UI came over more for like administration side of Drupal interactions, and that code making it to client side front end builds, it's mostly being removed. So if you ever wondered why there's all these jQuery UI plugins specifically that would end up in bundles, that's going to go away. But in the case that you were depending on Drupal 8's jQuery UI inclusion, be prepared for that kind of a removal.
The question.
Yeah, in fact, on the roadmap is a lot more administrative stabilization and modernization. That is one of the efforts in the Drupal community. So, including things like having a React-based admin UI is going to be really clutch in Drupal 9. Also, a lot of the JavaScript polyfills that they're adding is going to be really, really great to allow for backwards compatibility in older browsers, but allow developers to take advantage of cutting edge front end technologies that Bloom loves so much.
So if there's someone joining us today, team, that is about to start a new website or a new project, is there any reason not to start building it on 9 versus 8?
The only thing that might keep you is potentially the use of Drupal contrib modules that don't have full 9 support yet. And there are still a number that are really popular that do. However, all of the most commonly used modules have a very aggressive initiative to move those modules, to remove deprecated code, to update them, and so on, to be ready for Drupal 9. But that would be the only reason.
All right, I'm going to keep us moving here. Our next question: what are the most impactful new features in Drupal 9, and what's going to make my life easier as a developer, a front ender, or as a marketer slash content editor?
I think one of the most impactful things is knowing that um, that it's not going to be drastically different. There is not going to be a massive learning curve. You're not going to have to go and relearn the wheel, right, of what Drupal is. You're going to be able to start right where you left off with all of the benefits that you're used to, and being able to kind of like really use that without the very intense kind of migration process that we used to have to go through.
Yeah, I would also say that probably the most impactful feature is that there are no new features in Drupal 9. Right, we go from Drupal 8.7 to 8.8, there's new features. We go from 8.8 to 8.9, or from 8.8 to 9.0, there are no new features. But I like to think of the analogy here as you've just pressure washed your house, same house, nothing new, but oh man, it's so fresh and clean. Like it's a clean slate, and you're ready for all of the new features that are coming for Drupal 9. None of the new features are in Drupal 9, by the way, are expected to be backported to Drupal 8.
Yeah, so like Toby said, you're really just future-proofing yourself, right? So you're putting yourself in a good position so that when those new features actually do arrive, you're ready to be able to use them and implement them, but you're not stuck on older technology.
There's a quick note about what's coming down the pipe in CK Editor for like this impacts editorial experience, right? Because we use this WYSIWYG editor a lot. Drupal 9 is going to ship with 4. 4 is already in 8. Okay, there is CK Editor 5, which is basically a total rewrite, very drastically different. There are plans to move to CK Editor 5 down the lifespan of 9 as an optional kind of opt-in. But for now, know that like all of, the embeds, the custom kind of things that you might use in your WYSIWYG right now will stay the same with an option for that to be massively upgraded in the future.
Jonathan, as one of our personalization experts here at Phase 2, would you say, as regards to Acquia Lift, is Drupal 9 going to have any impact there? Or would you say it's kind of like a status quo?
Honestly, I think it's status quo, right? So like I said, the main APIs aren't changing. We're still going to use our same paradigm of creating these dynamic segments where you're able to create these personalized experiences. And at the fundamental stage, everything is going to stay the same. So you don't have to worry about going to Drupal 9 ruining your personalization experience with Acquia Lift. It's business as usual.
And Bloom, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about editorial experience in Drupal. Anything for people to keep in mind as they move from 8 to 9 about that?
So, that's in that CK editor. That's generally where most folks spend a lot of their time generating content. And it's going to be business as usual as well. Do know, though, that like the really major editorial projects, like, we've talked about HAX, H-A-X, which is a really, really big one. They've put a lot of effort into getting ready for 9. And, this world of like web components as a front end for Drupal is really picking up a lot of steam. Be aware that's coming. And obviously you can do this in 8, you can do this in 9 as well. But with what we get in Drupal 9, it's going to allow us to kind of take the same approach that we've done in 8 to get that new front end technology in. It's going to be really, really painless to do that.
And again, too, there's a lot of things that we can do in Drupal 8 that are going to work really well with Drupal 9, specifically with the entity embed module, right? So what this allows us to do is it allows us to be able to reference existing pieces of content, existing blocks, existing nodes, and things like that, and then embed them inside of like what Chris said, inside of that WYSIWYG editor. And then we can really kind of customize those various pieces of content by using leveraging Drupal's view modes, right? So we can have the same piece of content, but we can expose the view mode so we can actually display it in different ways. And again, take advantage of it now, right? You can use it now. It's great. It's really, it's really, really intuitive. And again, too, when it comes to Drupal 9, and whatever new features we get, we're going to be able to build on top of that.
And a quick, just kind of quick shout out to like a project Phase 2 uses called Particle, which is what we use to build our design systems in our front end. It's Drupal 9 compatible. It was that easy. I think there was one node dependency. We had to ask a maintainer to update, and they flipped a couple of switches, and we are Drupal 9 compatible. So the approach that we've taken to building UIs from 8 translates directly to 9. painlessly.
All right, I'm going to give you guys a big shout out for your analogies today. All three of you are killing it with these Drupal analogies. I love it. Drupal 10. So Drupal 10 is planned for 2022. Should I just wait for that release?
So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say no. So number one, Drupal 7 will be end of life at the same time Drupal 10 is going to be released, right? So if you wait to upgrade then you're going to be in that commercial support window for things like even just basic security fixes. Also, there's no reason to wait now because you can upgrade to Drupal 9 now, and then when Drupal 9 comes out, or when Drupal 10 comes out, you'll be ready to go. I think one of the things that we're going to see here is the transition that people are going through right now from 8 to 9 is going to be the sort of the proof in the pudding that this version bump from 8 to 9, 9 to 10 is going to work, and that's going to build the confidence that I think a lot of people who have gone from 5, 6, 7 to 8 have had to deal with in the past, and so there won't be the need to upgrade to wait until 10. So so the other thing to think about is Drupal 8 has been around for 5 years before we go to Drupal 9. And now we're going to turn around and do it in less than 2 to go to Drupal 10. And a lot of this is going to be based on the Symfony dependencies. Bloom mentioned earlier, Symfony 5 is already out. And so there's discussion about, will Drupal 10 be based on Symfony 5 or will it be based on 6? And there's some things to sort of figure out. By the time Drupal 10 is released, Symfony 5 will already be on long-term support, which means it will still be around for a few years, but it might be good to leapfrog and just go to Symfony 6. So those are some of the considerations.
All right, so we are at the Ask Me Anything portion of today's virtual event. We already have a few in the queue here, so I'm going to start firing away at you three. Okay. So Jerry asks, prior versions of Drupal upgrades saw a lag in initial contributed module updates, which slowed adoption. How does Drupal 9 improve this?
That's a great question. So one of the primary contribution to that upgrade lag, we saw this going from 5 to 6. It took about 6 months to get that sort of adoption, right? Going from 6 to 7 took almost a year to really see that adoption. 7 to 8 took 2 to 3 years for a lot of the biggest modules to actually get that sort of saturation level to really make 8 feel viable, right? So a lot of that had to do with the fact that the APIs behind everything were pulled out from under you every time a major version comes out. The functional paradigms that you built your modules on changed a lot, pretty significantly in a lot of ways. Refactoring your module, was a big effort. Going from 8 to 9, for instance, you have to make sure that you're not using some of that deprecated code to support Symfony 2 or 3. You need to make sure that you're following, a few design patterns that have been updated for Symfony 4. But by and large, the effort to migrate, the effort to upgrade your module for 8x to 9x is significantly lower in terms of effort than it ever has been before.
And one of the other important things to note is that, a lot of these module maintainers wrote the modules and maintain it as part of the sites they built on that version of Drupal, right? So, the faster those sites move to the next version, the faster we're going to see those contrib modules catch up. And since going to 8 to 9 is going to be much, much, much faster, we're going to see a pretty drastic bump in 9 support in the contrib space.
And again, too, just from the development space, just thinking about like the development paradigms that we use in Drupal 7 versus Drupal 8. In Drupal 7, right, everything was hook based, right? It was hook everything. going to Drupal 8, you had to convert your hooks to event subscribers. You had to write your own services and things like that. Going from 8 to 9, you don't have to do that. You can still use your same services. You can still use your same event subscribers. You just have to make sure to remove that deprecated code inside of it. So that upgrade process is a lot easier, and it's really just running things like Drupal check and things like that to make sure that you're not using those older mods or those older deprecated functions and things like that.
The paradigm is not changing.
Exactly.
That's the biggest win here is like, you know, we ripped a Band-Aid off going from 7 to 8. Had to happen, right? But it was pretty drastic. And the fact that now we get to reap the benefits of those hard decisions 5 years ago, we're now going to, it's going to be a much better space for us.
One of the other things that I think too that gets taken for granted in the Drupal 8 space is Drupal. The Drupal community really adopted the concept of semantic versioning when 8 was released, and so there is significantly tighter control over dependency management and the use of Composer and Composer support in core and these sorts of things that allow the community modules to really maintain that level of stability that you just kind of hoped in the past somebody would maintain on their own.
Yeah, let's not sleep on Composer. Composer as like a major factor of all of this, you know, this new stuff that's been able to come in is huge.
Team, our next. Oh, go ahead, Jonathan. You have another.
No. I'm just thinking about the ease of like upgrading with upgrading minor versions in Drupal 8 versus Drupal 7. With Composer, it's a one-line command. In Drupal 7, it wasn't that. So again, we're getting all these benefits and all the work that went into Drupal 8 to be able to get that. We're sending that to Drupal 9. So it's just great.
I think you all are going to really like this next question. Christina asks, decoupled Drupal was all the rage in the Drupal 8 era. How has this evolved recently? In what situations would going this route make sense for my organization?
Okay, so Bloom, I'm gonna let you get started, and then I'm gonna talk about my opinions on this.
Yes. So decoupled is a lot of things to a lot of people, and there's various levels of decoupling that we all know in like kind of the Drupal world, where you can have your perfectly headless site that's written in some JavaScript framework and Drupal's just an API, or you can sort of progressively decouple, where Drupal's a wrapper, an HTML wrapper around really awesome dynamic experiences that use those frameworks. And something I think phase 2 has really settled on over the last couple of years is that like that progressive decoupling is very, very valuable. It allows us to like have the benefits of what's baked into Drupal, but also the very cool experiences of things like React and Vue.js. So, choosing to do that means that when you go to 9, right, you still have your NPM modules, you still have your JavaScript application. It has no idea necessarily about the Drupal world it lives in. All it knows is it's given data and it runs in a browser. So, going to 9 almost is easier for the progressively decoupled sites because of the less dependencies required on, Drupalisms. But 9 gives us the same tools we had in 8. If you want to serve JSON or if you want to embed, data inside of the markup, you still have that kind of flexibility to leverage decoupled solutions like that.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. So when I think about decoupled versus progressively decoupled, there are a few things that come to mind. The first is Drupal's good at a lot of things, right? And so is React, right? But you have to think about just real world scenarios. You have to think about your time frame. You have to think about the actual resources that you have to actually build the application. Where are their strengths? Where are the weaknesses? You have to kind of take that into account. And a lot of times we tend to jump into things and say, oh yeah, I want to do just React everything. But then you take a step back and you realize, that may not be the best decision. React is great and React is wonderful, but when you have these these really like dynamic pages and these dynamic elements, yeah, it makes 100% to do React. But if you have a page that's just static text, there's no interactions on it, and you have a bunch of Drupal developers, at a certain point, it makes sense to just go ahead and use Twig, right? Because you're able to use the tools that you know. it's easier to maintain and things like that. But when it comes time to use those really nice and like, you know, those like really flashy interactive interactions, then yeah, React is great at things like that. And you can use both in an ecosystem that works okay. And one of the things that we did on one of our clients was we use Twig for most things, but for the interactive elements we use React. But we actually ended up using the React router for some of these actual pages that need to be super dynamic, that we needed the history API to be able to go directly to. So it's not an all or nothing approach, right? We can use the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. And we mentioned earlier about web components, which is a standard. It's actually a web standard approach to building custom HTML elements that a browser understands. So, you know, being able to use these tools is going to let you, right? If for whatever reason, if you don't want to write everything in Twig, right? If you want to move to something that's a little bit more, you know, shareable between systems, that that standard of web components works really, really well. Twig is more than happy to take in your custom component and say, hey, we have a, you know, we have a P2 accordion, for instance, right? Being able to use that in Twig and then go use that in React is an option now with the modern tooling that we have. So yeah, decoupling still with us for sure. I don't think it always looks like totally headless, right? And Drupal just as an API. I think that really kind of undersells what Drupal can provide with all of the, you know, all of the power that it currently has.
We did get a follow-up question as you guys were talking about this, which is, you mentioned progressively decoupled. What exactly does that mean, and how is it different from decoupled?
Yeah. So I love the idea of like the perfect React site with no backend, right? The backend is just an API across the internet that we consume and then render that data. That's purely decoupled right there, right? A front end with no idea of what its backend is. This progressively decoupled concept is just, you know, a term for letting Drupal own the wrapper, the head tag and the body tag, and then all the dependencies and things like the router, and embedding these applications and these experiences, like Jonathan mentioned, right, inside of Drupal, leveraging Drupal hosting, right, that exists out there, but being able to bring in that sort of dynamic experience through JavaScript, but still getting the benefit of like, hey, the Drupal profile system, right? We've got a login, the Drupal router, all of the things that, you know, we've kind of taken for granted, right, over the years. So that's what we mean by progressively decoupled, is not just letting Drupal make all the HTML, right? Letting, you know, these other frameworks own that experience.
And to something along those lines, right? So when you go progressively decoupled, you don't have to, like, the page is still going to be served by Drupal, but you don't have to let React like control the whole page. We can do portions of the page. And one of the things that we did, which I'm actually really proud of, which is pretty slick, was we actually had for one of our sites, we actually had an API driven header and footer, right? Because it was actually much easier to be able to build this header and footer in React, or I'm sorry, in Vue. This is actually in Vue.js than it was to actually have to manipulate the DOM and do it with jQuery or JavaScript and things like that. And the benefit that we got from that was that our client had they had all these other portals that they were eventually going to bring over into the Drupal site, but they wanted to theme them and they wanted to make sure they had the same consistent look and feel as the main Drupal site. So since we went with this progressively decoupled route for the header and the footer, and they were API driven, what we were able to do was just supply the vendors who wanted our look and feel with a little JS snippet, a little CSS snippet, and then we just gave them a little bit of DOM to be able to add to their templates, and then they were able to have our full markup, our markup of our header and our footer and our styles and our style guide. And then anytime we made a change to the header, anytime we changed a menu link or anything we did to the header, it just automatically propagated to those lower sites.
Yeah, and to kind of build on that, one of the things that I always like to bring into the discussion about, you know, whether or not you should decouple is it's a matter of where your content is coming from. So if your content is centrally in Drupal, it may not make a lot of sense to decouple. If you have federated content from a bunch of different sources, it probably sounds like that's the way you want to go, is fully decoupled. You know, if you have you know, multiple sources of content. In terms of progressively decoupled, though, There may be cases where, yeah, Drupal is the primary repository for most of your content. But there may be cases where, let's talk about media, for instance. You have, or sports. You have a lot of really ephemeral data, live scores and live updates and things like that the back end just doesn't need to know about. And that's where a progressively decoupled, single page application style page that gets delivered from Drupal is going to really shine, because then it can go and fetch these other pieces that it needs from known data sources. You see this a lot of times too in places like multi-site platforms. Let's say you have a site with 100 or 200 or 300 sites being maintained from your single code base. That you have a single database for each one of these, right? Maintaining their own sets of config and content, but being able to progressively decouple allows you then to sort of blur the lines of where the content comes from. This website may not need to maintain some content that this one has that it wants, which is really good for being able to share, relevant news across multiple platforms or multiple websites within the same platform. So there's a lot of different reasons that you may want to progressively decouple, and a lot of that just has to do with where your content originates.
So our next question is a two-parter, and I love it. It's from Brian. He says, so the first part of his question is, do you see Drupal as still the open source champ in terms of, I guess, WordPress and some of the other options out there? And then the second part is, how do you feel like Drupal will now be positioned to compete with the proprietary market now that 9 is here?
That's a great question, and it kind of drives a few things home for me right now. Let's see, there's a couple of things there to unpack, right? So number one, I think Drupal is going to be the chief CMS in the open source space for a number of years to come. And that's not meant to be a knock against something like WordPress or some of the others. Every CMS does different things really, really well. I think one of the things that Drupal does really well is the breadth of the community. It has a pretty significant community, active participation. There are thousands of developers working on modules every day. So I think that alone grants a lot of the breadth of the richness of features, as well as a keen eye on security. There's a reason that Drupal is the number one open source CMS for government websites and for medical websites, because it does have a really stringent security policy, and it has guardrails to keep those things in line. So that's one. And so in answer to the open source question, I think that's going to continue to be the case for Drupal 9 and Drupal 10. I think in terms of comparing it to to proprietary systems, we've spent, and again, I don't want to knock any other systems, because every other CMS has their own thing. But for instance, we spent some time really digging into Sitecore, and just the licensing structure, the ability to stand up a development environment just to stand up spikes was a significant amount of time on the upfront before you can have any demonstrable progress, as opposed to, let me go just spin up a Docker container, run a composer command. I have a Drupal site, that I'm messing around in 15 minutes, So I think that the ease of use, as well as the licensing and the costs, are going to be probably some of the biggest competitive edges that Drupal has to offer over things like just like Sitecore, AEM, and so on.
Now, there has been an explosion in the headless CMS space over the last couple of years, right? That's just a editor as a service, and then you get a JSON file, and it's up to you to do what you need with that JSON file. There's, Strappy, Contentful, Netlify CMS, Tina CMS. There's a bunch of these out there. And those are great for like really focused, contained, scoped projects, right? Make content, put on React page. The moment, right, you need a bigger box and you need more features and you want the security and you want the community and you want that flexibility, right? Drupal's always going to own that space. It brings so much to the table. Yeah, it's a little bigger than, say, Netlify CMS, but it brings a lot more features that you can rely on being there and being pre-integrated without all of the overhead of trying to integrate. So that's something like, if I need to build a little teeny tiny thing and it's fast and I'm just goofing around, I'll reach for Netlify CMS. But, if I need to solve big content problems for clients, it's always going to be Drupal because of what it offers.
And then too, going back to the proprietary solution conversation, you have to think about the hosting aspect as well, right? So when you go with these other big providers, you're locked into their hosting, you're locked in their SLA. You don't have many choices that you can make. But when you go with a solution that's open source like Drupal, you can host with Pantheon, you can host with Acquia, you can spin up your own Kubernetes cluster and set up your own development workflow and deploy there, right? You can really customize it to your organization's needs. So I think that's something to be said for that.
So we are about out of time. I do want to give each of you the chance to leave our audience with your biggest takeaway, like what you want them to take away from this time we spent together. If there's one thing you want someone to walk away with from this conversation today, what is it?
I'll go real fast, just because I'm used to like coming to these things and like talking about big, crazy new features that change everything. And this is one of the first times where I get to show up and say, this won't be scary. This isn't some brand new thing that you're going to be forced to learn. It's going to change the way you do everything. It's not a big deal. That's the big takeaway for me.
Yeah, Bloom, like, he took the words out of my mouth. Like, I totally echo his sentiments, right? Because there are a few modules that I work on, a few modules that I maintain, and going from 7 to 8, it was scary. It was scary having to do that and having to make sure that everything's going to work the way that it should. But having the confidence to know that the underlying APIs aren't changing, and I just need to remove a few pieces of deprecated code, is just it helps me sleep at night, right? So I think that's my main takeaway, and I think it's like the Bloom said, it's not scary. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is we're no longer building website platforms that you can hopefully get 4 or 5 years of life out of, right? Like it's not something that it's gonna dry up and the next version of Drupal is gonna come out, and you either have to throw everything or wait till the next version to come out and leapfrog, right? Like that was a really common strategy for long-term support. Now we're talking about the longevity of a platform and an ecosystem that can grow and evolve over time. And we're looking at platforms that are going to be 10, 15 years later down the road with newer versions of Drupal that you can continually grow and prune. It's more of a garden or a bonsai tree at this point. It's something that is just going to get better and better over time. And you change, you make some adjustments, you train it and whatever else you need. But at the end of the day, it's something that you're going to spend the same amount of time and energy and money on something that you're going to get for a significantly longer period of time.
All right. Well, if we did not get to your question today, or just something you want to ask us offline, you can feel free to reach out to us at marketing@phase2technology.com. We'll make sure we get it in front of one of these experts here, your question, and get back to you individually. You will be able to find us at DrupalCon Global next week. So hopefully we'll have a chance to keep the conversation going there. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.